Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Eruvin Daf Chav Hey, where 2 lines from the top says the Gemara, Karfif Yosin Beis Osayim. If we have this karfif, this enclosure, this non-residential enclosure which is larger in size than 2 sa, Shelo Yukaf L'Dira. It wasn't enclosed for the sake of a residential purpose. Now he's coming to lessen the surface area, to bring it down to the 2 sa'ah limit. If he tried to do it by planting trees in this karfif, resulting in a somewhat of a smaller surface area, to bring it down to 2 sa'ah, lo yav a miyut. It's not considered to be a miyut. He's not lessening anything because the lames are part and parcel of this karfif. Actually says it's a derech to have trees in a karfif. Therefore, they're bottled to the karfif. The actual space that the trees take up are not deducted from the total area size of this karfif. And therefore, it remains a karfif, which is greater in size than 2 sa. However, bana by amud, let's say he built a post in this karfif, Gavaya Sora, 10 tfachim high, V'rachav Daled, and 4 tfachim wide. So it's a very large size, significantly sized post. That does affect a deduction, a lessening of the total space, the surface area of the karfif, because this post is an elevated area, has a different type of designation and function than the rest of the surface area of the karfif, and therefore it deducts, it lessens from the total size of the karfif. It's going to be a different type of area. So when we measure how large is the karfif, now it is not greater than 2 sa. Says the Gemara, if it's Gavaya Sora, V'rachav Dalet, 10 tfachim high, 4 tfachim wide, in which case it is regarded as a significantly sized post and surface area. Have a miyut. It's effective to go ahead and lessen the total space of the karfif. Pachas megimel. But let's say the surface area of this amud is narrower than 3 tfachim, in which case it falls within the limits of lavud. Generally, less than 3 is not something we reckon with, and therefore in this case, lo yav a miyut. It doesn't do anything to lessen the total surface area of the karfif. Megimel v'adalad, let's say it's anywhere from 3 tfachim to 4, so that's out of the lavud number, but it's not yet a shir chashav, which is generally attributed to 4 tfachim. A makom of 4 is considered a makom chashav. Somewhere in between, it's out of lavud, but has not yet reached the point of 4 tfachim. We have a machlekes. Rava amar have a miyut. This as well can be mamayit, can be effective to lessen the size of the karfif, because since it's out of lavud, it has somewhat of a significance to it, and it's considered to be its own space, its own usage area, and it's not included in the total surface area of the karfif. V'Rav Amar lo yav a miyut. He maintains, since it's less than 4, it doesn't have the chashivas. It cannot be regarded as its own usage space, and it's bottle to the rest of the karfif, and you have not really accomplished anything. Explains the Gemara, Rabba Amar have a miyut. It does affect a miyut here, because it has already left the confines. It's beyond the share of lavud. It's past 3, so it has chashivas. Rav Amar lo yav a miyut. No, there's no miyut taking place. The kivan lo yav a makom dalet, since it is not a makom, doesn't have a surface space of 4 by 4 tfachim lo chashiv, doesn't have prominence and significance, and therefore it cannot be regarded as its own surface area, and is reckoned within the total share of the karfif. Let's take a look at Rashi inside, 4 lines from the top. B'lonis lav miyut. So this is the beginning of the Gemara where he tried to mimamayit the makom of the karfif by planting trees, hoping that the space of the actual tree would be deducted from the total space of the karfif. The Gemara tells us that's not the case. Why? So explains Rashi, the derech karfif leaves b'lonis. It is acceptable and customary for a karfif to have trees in it. Therefore, the trees that are present there, don't go ahead and deduct anything from the size of the original karfif. They're considered to be part and parcel of the karfif. They're like bottled to the karfif, and the actual space of that the tree takes up is still considered to be part of the karfif and is reckoned within the total space of the karfif. However, if he builds a post, which is an elevated surface which can serve a different function than the karfif, than the floor around it, so that depends on the size of the amud. Bana by amud vafilu be'emtza, even in the middle of the karfif. By doing so, he lessened the total surface area from being larger than 2 sa. He brought it down to 2 sa. If the area is merely less than 3 tfachim, even if he by building this amud, he effected a deduction. He went ahead and he lessened the total space, brought it down to 2 sa. Kimanda lesidami says, though it doesn't exist. Less than 3 tfachim is bottled to the karka, bottled to the karfif. We don't even notice it. The nafkalim terislovet. This is going on to the next case, where it's beyond 3 tfachim, but not yet reached 4 tfachim. Rabbi says it works. The nafkalim terislovet. Kalaima. What he means to say is as follows: the chashiv gimel ba'alma, because generally we attribute chashivas, prominence, to something which is 3 tfachim in size. L'meifak miteris lovet. It leaves the restriction of lovet. It's no longer lovet, meaning we view it, we notice it. Therefore, in this case as well, it's considered to be something of prominence. It's chashiv, and it's not batal to the surrounding area, and therefore you will deduct the surface area of that amud from the total area of the karfif. And if it brings it down to the acceptable limit of 2 sa, then you can carry it throughout the karfif. Continues the Gemara. What if he goes ahead and he actually tries to rebuild the enclosure? Now he's not going to knock down the original mechitzas. Rather, he's going to add a new mechitza within the surface area, within the enclosure of this karfif. So this karfif is surrounded by 4 mechitzas, which were not constructed l'shem dira, for the sake of residency. So now he's going to create a new mechitza inside this enclosure, alongside the interior surface of one of those mechitzas, hoping that this new mechitza, which is being done l'shem dira, is going to change the status of the entire enclosure. Because now it has, at least on one side, a mechitza which was l'shem dira. Says the Gemara, it depends where he built that mechitza. If he built it too close to the original mechitza, right inside the original mechitza, he didn't do anything. It's just a redundant mechitza there. Halachically, this doesn't have a din of a mechitza. But if he spaced it far enough, he pulled it into the karfif far enough from the original mechitza. So you have the original mechitza, and then the new mechitza is pulled inward into the surface area, into the enclosure of the karfif, far enough from the original mechitza, where al pi halacha we consider it to be a proper mechitza. Now this mechitza, which was done l'shem dira, will transform the entire enclosure within it to be considered a makaim, which is hukav l'dira. Explains the Gemara. Here chik min ha'koisel dalit. If he built a new wall at a distance of 4 tfachim from the original wall, so he pulled in the new wall into the surface, into the enclosure of this karfif. He pulled it away from the original wall 4 tvach, which is a shir chashiv. Generally speaking, a mechitza which creates a partition for 4 tvachim is considered to be halachically a valid mechitza. So that's effective. He has now firstly enclosed this karfif l'shem dira, and it's considered to be a residential enclosure. What if it's within 3 tfachim of the original mechitza? Less than 3 tfachim is lovet. It's as though it's connected, part and parcel of the original mechitza. He has not yet created any new mechitza. Lo yhoyel, it's totally ineffective. Megim of adalit. What if it's anywhere from 3 to 4? Then we have that original machlekes. Rabba Amar hoyel, it's effective. Rabba Amar lo'ein hoyel, it's ineffective, as the Gemara explains. Rabba Amar hoyel, it works. To nafik lemiteris lovet, because once it's past 3 tfachim, it leaves the share of lovet, and therefore we reckon with it, we notice it. So, although generally speaking, A mechitza needs to accomplish something. It needs to create an enclosure for tefachim, which in this case doesn't do. However, perhaps when it comes to the concept of hukav l'dira, it's different. Here we're merely trying to modify the karfeh. We're trying to enhance the enclosure l'shem dira. So perhaps we don't need to conform to the general guideline of a mechitza, which needs to be on 4 tefachim. In this case, Rava will hold, even if it's less than 4 tefachim, as long as it's out of the 3 tefachim loved, we already notice it. And it's sufficient to affect an enhancement, to consider to be a modification on the karfef within it. It's considered to have enhanced it and benefited and improved it and created the dira aspect here, due to the fact that we have this additional mechitza, which is somewhat being reckoned with. That's Rabba's sheet. Rabba ma'ein and mile doesn't work, given lo yahavi makam dalid, lo chashiv, since he's not partitioning in makam dalid because it's within 4 tefachim, the original wall. So al pi din, al pi halacha, it doesn't seem to be a creation of a new mechitza here. Therefore, we must conform with the general guidelines of mechitza. Since it's not considered proper mechitza, it will not affect any change. It will not create any transformation on this karfif, and it will not be considered to be a newly enclosed area l'shem dira. This is the first version of the Gemara. Again, less than 3, all agree, is not reckoned with. It's loved. Beyond 4, all agree it's a makam chashav, and certainly is reckoned with. Between 3 and 4, we have machlekes. Rabba says it works. Rabba says it doesn't work. So Rabba holds, as long as it's somewhat reckoned with, that's enough. Rabba says, you need to create a new makom, to change, to transform, take something old and transform it anew. You need to create something new, a makom dalit, which you don't have in this case. This is the first version of Simi Mas and the Kula. You have a different version, a more lenient version of the machlekes. As Rashi explains, he learned as follows: if it's anywhere past 3, past love, all agree, that's enough. Because although he didn't create something anew, it's just past love, it's not yet 4. That's enough to transform, to change the makom from a non-dira makom to add that element of dira to it. It's important enough. Something which is greater than 3 has somewhat of an importance, and therefore it can contribute. It can provide that dira element, a dira ingredient to the enclosure. But if it's less than 3, in which case it falls within the limits of lavud, here is the machlekes. Rava says, even in this case it works. Rava says it doesn't. So Rava will understand, less than lavud is not reckoned with. What does Rava hold? Rava says, even if it's within lavud, we don't even notice it. Here it's different, because all we need is a slight improvement on this hekif, slight improvement on this enclosure. You don't need to reconstruct those mechitzas. You need to indicate in somewhat way that it's now being designated l'shem dira. So if you add this wall, even if it's within 3 to the previous wall, that is enough to contribute that dira element to this enclosure. The same thing regarding that post we mentioned earlier, which was trying to lessen the surface area of this karfef. He holds that even if it's less than 3 tefachim, that's enough. Because, bottom line, it's a separate area, it's a post, it's not really part and parcel of a surrounding area, therefore, it's enough. When it comes to the sheer Beis Hasayim, since it's not viewed together with the surrounding area, it's an elevated area, it's enough. For the din of Beis Hasayim, we don't consider it to be an area greater than Beis Hasayim because we deduct that surface area despite the fact it's less than 3 tefachim. Continues the Gemara. He's going to try to lessen the surface area of the karfeh, bring it down to 2 sa, by adding a layer of cement to the interior surface of the enclosing walls, of the surrounding walls around this karfeh. Toch by tit. So he smears a layer of cement to the inner surface of the wall, which is surrounding the karfeh, which is right now greater in size than 2 sa. By smearing that tit, he's trying to lessen the surface area, bring it down to 2 sa. So it depends. Toch by tit, if this tit has the ability, it's strong enough, it can sustain itself, stand on its own, even if it would not be leaning on that wall. It would stand, have a miyut, this is effective and it affects miut. It makes the area into a smaller size. However, if the tit doesn't have the ability to stand on its own, it only stands because it's leaning, it's attached, it's pasted onto the former wall. They have a machlekes. Rava mavamiyut. Even in this case, it can go ahead and lessen the total surface area of the karfif because the usage area has been lessened. It's now smaller in size. Rava amar levamiyut. Since the tit cannot stand on its own, merely because it's being supported by the former wall, that's why it's standing. Lo have a miyut, we don't reckon with it, it's bottle to the original wall, and we don't deduct the tit area from the total space, and therefore it retains its large size, status, greater than tusa. Explains the Gemara. Rava mahava miyut, even this tit, which needs to be supported by that wall, it will be might the total surface area. Hashtami. Right now, is it standing yet? So right now, it's lessening the surface area. It's part of the structure, and the interior space of this karfif right now has been brought down to the limit of tusa. Rava amar lavamiyut. It cannot be might the surface of the karfif. Kiven the layochal and make him fnei atzmoi. Since it doesn't have the ability to stand on its own, loy klumu, it's not worth anything. We don't reckon with it. It's like buttled to that wall, and therefore it doesn't do anything to deduct from the total surface area of this karfif. Continues the Gemara. Hirchak minat tel dalit. Let's say he has a karfif, this enclosure, which was not l'shem dir and was greater in size than two sa, and now he's going to try to reconfigure those mechitzas. He's going to create a new mechitza to create a makom dir. How's he going to do it? We're speaking about an enclosure which has three mechitzas around it, three proper mechitzas. And on the fourth side is a tel, this hill, which creates a mechitza for the fourth side. Now, he's going to make a mechitza, a new mechitza, l'shem dir, for the sake of residency, and he's going to run it alongside the interior surface of that tail, meaning within the enclosure, within the karfif. He's going to build a new mechitza, l'shem dira, alongside the tail, which will create a substitution for the tail. Instead of the tail now being the fourth wall of the karfif, this mechitza, which is going to be built within that tail, along the interior surface of that tail, within the karfif, will now take the place of the tail, will be considered a new mechitza, the fourth wall of this karfif. Now, since this mechitza is being done l'shem dir, for the sake of residing within this karfif now will attain a new status of makom hukav l'dira, and despite its large size, one should be able to carry within it. Says the Gemara, hirchik minat tel dalet. So if this new mechitza was placed at a distance of 4 tfachim, which is a makom chashiv, from the interior surface of that mount, and he made a mechitza there, it's effective. It's a new mechitza, it's a new enclosure, and now this karfif has been turned to a makom hukav l'dira, and tiltal is allowed. Pachas megimel. What if it's situated less than 3 tfachim from that mound, less than lavut, in which case it's merely a redundant mechitza, it's not considered to be a new mechitza, it's like part and parcel of that tail. Oy al svas tail. Or, let's say it was up on top of the mound, so we have the karfif with 3 mechitzas, we have the mound on the fourth side, he builds a mechitza on top of that mound, which is already a mechitza on its own. He hasn't done anything, because it's a mechitza on top of a mechitza. So, logically speaking, this is not considered a mechitza. Says, well, we have a machlekes. So, if you made it pachas megimel or al svas tail, on the ridge of the tail itself, in which case it's actually a mechitza on top of another mechitza. Now, the top mechitza is being done l'shem dira. Problem is, there's already a mechitza right in that same spot. So what do you accomplish? Rav machlekes. Rav Chizda, Rav Hamnuna. Rav machlekes between Rav Chizda and Rav Hamnuna, chad ha'mahoil. One says, even in this case it works. Because although it's a mechitza right next to another mechitza, or on top of another mechitza, in which case, halachically speaking, he hasn't really created a new mechitza. But it will work pertaining to the karfif, to make it into a makom mukvel adira. Because here we don't really need a mechitza to conform to the general guidelines of mechitza according to one of these shittas. Because he's merely trying to turn this place into a hukah for adira. So merely redesigning those mechitzas, just providing an enhancement on those pre-existing mechitzas. With this enhancement is l'shem dira, that is sufficient to transform this enclosure into makom mukvel adira. That's the svara of this shit. Chad amar hoyel, even in this case, it's effective. But chad amar loy hoyel, the other shita says no, it's ineffective because al pi halacha, this mechitza, which is sitting on top of another mechitza, is worthless. Therefore, he has not done anything to affect change on this karfif. So machlekes Rav Chizda and Rav Huna, we're not sure who says what. Says with this time, you can actually conclude that Rav Chizda amar hoyel, he's the one that says that it works. The itma, as we learned, ha'isa mechitza gam mechitza. If one constructs a mechitza on top of another mechitza, amar Rav Chizda b'Shabbos hoyel. When it comes to Shabbos, such as in our case, it's effective. It turns the enclosure into a makom mukvel adira and can carry throughout it despite its large size. That's regarding Shabbos. But nichse hager loy kana. Rav Chizda agrees. When it comes to doing a kinyan by the nechosim of a ger, by the unattended possessions of a ger who passed away, his possessions become hefker. So if a person wants to be koina, wants to acquire this land, he must make a proper kinyan of chazaka, something which actually benefits the land, like plowing the land or creating a mechitza around it, which is an expression of ownership. So if Chizda will agree, if there's a pre-existing mechitza around this land and he simply plants another mechitza on top of it, that doesn't provide any benefit to the land. He's not enclosing, it's already pre-enclosed. So it's not considered to be a masa kinyan. He will not be koina. So if Chizda agrees over there, but when it comes to Shabbos, when it comes to reconstructing, to modifying the mechitzas around the karfif, to turn it into a makom mukvel adira, he holds even a mechitza top mechitza is enough of a modification, of an enhancement to create a makom mukvel adira. So apparently Rav Chizda is the one that holds that a mechitza gam mechitza works. That's the raya we're trying to prove. That Rav Chizda was a shita that holds it works. Rav Sheshes Samar, no, after Shabbos, nami loy hoyel, even when it comes to Shabbos, this mechitza on top of another mechitza is ineffective. Says Gemara Testayim. Indeed, we have a conclusion from here. We have clarity that Rav Chizda is the man the Amar that holds that it works. Amar Rav Chizda, umayil Rav Sheshes. You know Rav Sheshes, although he holds that generally a mechitza top of mechitza will not be effective to turn this karfif into a residential enclosure, he would agree in the following case. Shem asa mechitza al hatel shehoyel. Let's say he's trying to surround the actual mound. So we have a mound which is lifted from the area around it at a height of 10 tefachim. That in itself is considered a mechitza, which creates a shesiyachet on the top surface of the tail. Let's say we have a very large size tail, greater than 2 sa, which was not hukaf l'dira. Now he's going to plant a mechitza on top of that tail, right alongside the edges. Even though technically speaking, it's a mechitza on top of mechitza, because this tail itself has been already elevated a share of 10 tefachim, which that itself is considered a mechitza. But placing a mechitza on top of that ridge, on top of the sfasa tail, even if Sheshes would agree, creates a new enclosure for the surface on top of the tail. It makes it makom mukvel adira if it was done for the sake of a residential purpose. Why? Why would Rav Sheshes agree in this case? Although Rav Sheshes generally holds that mechitza on top of mechitza is worthless. But that's only when you're trying to affect change to the surface below. For instance, in the case of the karfa we discussed, we have a large area, a flat area, which was already enclosed by a mechitza. You place a mechitza on top of that mechitza, you haven't done anything for the surface below, which has already experienced enclosure. It's already been mukaf to the mechitzas, to the lower mechitzas. The upper mechitzas are ineffective, not benefiting the ground below in any way. But when it comes to the top of the tail, which doesn't really have a gate around it, so these people sitting up there, they experience the benefit of the new mechitza, which is surrounding the top surface of that tail. So, halachically speaking, the surface of the tail was already considered to be enclosed by the mere fact that it was elevated from the ground around it. But adding that mechitza adds something, contributes to the residence on the surface of the tail, and therefore, since it was done l'shem dira, from here on in, the surface of the tail is considered to be makam mukav l'dira. Says the Gemara, Moidler of Shesha would agree to me, Shem asa mechitza al tail, if he created another mechitza on the tail alongside the ridge of the tail. Shehoyel, it is certainly effective my time. Why? Hoyel uba'avir mechitzes halyoinus hudar. Since the fellow residing on the surface of the tail, he is residing ba'avir mechitzes halyoinus, within the airspace of the upper mechitzes. He sees them, he experiences them, he enjoys them, he has from them. Therefore, they certainly positively affect the surface of the tail and turn it into a makam mukav l'dir. By Rabba Bar Chana, according to the Shita that holds that mechitza on top of mechitza is ineffective. What about the following case? There was a mechitza, he built another mechitza on top of it, and nivlu mechitza satachtoinis. It was sitting on soft earth, and the bottom mechitzas got swallowed and sunk into the ground. And only the upper mechitzas are right now existing and in place. Those upper mechitzas were created l'shem dira. Now, what is the halacha? Says the Gemara, pertaining to what halacha are we asking? L'mai. Ila nichsei hager is a discussion regarding being koined and nechasim. The ger, as mentioned earlier, the ger that died without yershim. Now his nechasim are considered to be ownerless, so one would like to make a kinyan to acquire his possessions. So there was a field with a mechitza, and he built a mechitza on top of that mechitza, which the Gemara before told us that upper mechitza is ineffective. Now, what happens if the lower mechitzas get sunk into the ground, and the upper mechitzas are the sole remaining mechitzas? Has his fellow done a kinyan? The fact that he built those mechitzas, which are now the sole existing mechitzas, is that sufficient to provide him ownership, acquisition of this field? Says Gemara, Hainu du Yirmei Bira. This is similar to the case that halacha taught to us by Yirmei Bira, who told us no, the kinyan must happen at the time of the act of the masa. Since at the point in time that he built that mechitzas, it was a mechitza on top of a mechitza and ineffective, not sufficient to be considered a kinyan. So although eventually things developed in a manner where the sole remaining mechitzas were the ones that he built, that's insufficient to be koined the nechasim l'ger. Let's see the Gemara. The Omar Yirmei Bira, Omar B'Yehuda. Haiman the Shada Lifta. One tosses a turnip seed, Pila the Ara de Ger, into a pre-existing pit or a crack in the land of the Ger who passed away. So he didn't really touch the land, he didn't plow it, he didn't really do a kinyan, he just threw a pit in there, a seed, so that eventually it could take root and grow. So this act is not a masa kinyan. It doesn't benefit the land. So at this point there was no kinyan. V'asi Yisrael achrina, and another Yisrael came along, Rafik Bepurta. He plowed a bit in the land, which is a masa kinyan, which benefits directly the land. Basra kani, kamaloi kani. The second fellow was koina, because he did a proper kinyan. But the original fellow did not do any kinyan, and therefore he is not koina. So Basra Kani, the second one, is koina, and the first one is like koina, is not koina. Now, although his turnip is going to blossom and grow and certainly benefit the land, my time of why was the first one not koina? Be'idna de shada. At the point in time when he threw that seed in there, like a shavach, he didn't benefit the land. There was no shvach applied to this land. Kika shavcha. Eventually, when there was a shvach, when his plant grew and blossomed, when the land benefited from this plant, it was it was on its own. It just happened. It took root and it started growing. It wasn't a direct act on account of the first Yisrael. It wasn't a display of ownership. It wasn't an act of kinyan. So even though it happens later, that's not really his doing directly. Therefore, he has not done any kinyan. Rather, the second fellow came along and plowed just a little bit. He was kind. So getting back to our case where we planted the mechitza on top of another mechitza, which at that point in time was not considered a kinyan, because it was just a redundant mechitza. So although the original mechitza sunk into the ground, leaving just the upper mechitza intact, That's something which happens with Mela. It's not a direct act upon which was affected by that first Yisrael, which was accomplished by the original person, and therefore it's not considered to be a Maaseh Kinyan. So regarding Nichsa Ger, this is clear, it wouldn't work. Are you asking regarding Shabbos? Meaning, the Gemara at this point figures, certainly during an ordinary weekday this would work. So if he goes ahead and builds a mechitza, l'shem dira, on top of a pre-existing mechitza which was not l'shem dira, and it's a Thursday afternoon, the original mechitza sinks into the ground, leaving the upper mechitza intact. Certainly, comes Shabbos, this area is a karf hukif l'dira, and one can carry throughout it, despite its large size. The question is, let's say this happened on Shabbos itself. The lower mechitzas sunk into the ground, like the wall around Yerichai, leaving the upper mechitzas intact. Shall we say, well, it's like a newly constructed mechitza around an area. So all this place was already previously enclosed by the original mechitza, but it wasn't l'shem dira. It now acquired a new type of mechitza, a dira mechitza. Should we consider this to be a newly constructed mechitza which took place on Shabbos? It might be problematic. It says Gemara, "Ve'elin Shabbos have a mechitza hanasa b'Shabbos." It should be regarded like a mechitza which was constructed on Shabbos, and therefore, is that the question here? And we learned in the Brisa that certainly works. With Tanya kol mechitza hanasa b'Shabbos, bein b'shagi bein b'mezid, shema mechitza. Whether b'shagi b'mezid, a mechitza constructed on Shabbos, even if it was done by Isser, fact is, you have a mechitza here, and can carry throughout the mechitza. So in this case as well, a mechitza which was done on Shabbos, certainly in this manner, which was memela, it happened on its own, mechitza is considered to be a proper mechitza. This makom is hukav l'dira, due to the fact that the upper mechitzas, which are now the solely standing mechitzas, are dira mechitzas. Says the Gemara, but it's not so simple. Lav itmar lo. Haven't we learned a pshat on this price? Amar of Nachman lo yishanu. The allowance to use mechitzas which were constructed on Shabbos is only elul lizrik, only minat Torah. It's considered to be a proper enclosure. Shayachid, for instance, if one throws an object into this area from a shesura mischayev, aval letaltal asam. But midrabanan, we don't consider this to be a mechitzah. For instance, letaltal, to carry throughout this entire enclosure, we don't consider this to be a proper shayachid. Says the Gemara, no. Ki etmar, Rav Nachman amazed etmar. Rav Nachman was referring specifically to a case where one constructed those mechitzas on Shabbos, amazed intentionally to do an isser, he did an isser. Therefore, there's a knas. Apparently, you cannot carry throughout these mechitzas. But otherwise, mechitzas are certainly valid, even for the sake of carrying within them. So the Gemara concludes that in our case, where the bottom mechitzah sunk into the ground on Shabbos, leaving the upper mechitzas in place, since those mechitzas were constructed l'shem dira, this karfif now is a mokum mukfil dira and is mutar b'tilt. Continues the Gemara on the topic of the nichse hager, which requires a proper kinyan. Hayitzisa, there was a story with this woman. The avda mechitza al gab mechitza b'nichse hager. She constructed one mechitza on top of another mechitza, which was enclosing the nichse hager, and her intent was to acquire the nechasim in this manner. So what happened? Asa ugavra. This other person came along. Rafag b'purta, he plowed a bit in the karka for the sake of being koine. Asal kamed Rav Nachman. So he came before Rav Nachman. Ukma biyade. He granted the land to this fellow because he did a proper kinyan. He directly benefited the land by plowing. Asas I. So this woman came along v'kotzavcha, and she cried out to Rav Nachman, kotzavcha kamei, before him. How can you give it to the other fellow? Look, I constructed this whole wall here to be koine. Why are you giving it to him? Amar Los, Rav Nachman responded, my avidlach, what can I do for you? You didn't do a proper chazaka the way people customarily do. Meaning, your mechitza was useless and redundant. It was sitting on top of another mechitza. It wasn't benefiting the land whatsoever. It's not a proper kinyan. Therefore, I must give it, I must grant it to this other fellow who did a proper kinyan. Okay, so in conclusion, we spoke about a karfif, which was larger than two saw, which was not hukaf ladira. The Gemara tells us there are two methods that can be applied to allow carrying this karfif. Number one is called miyut, lessening the total space of this karfif to bring it down to two saw. Number two will be creating a new mechitza, which was done for the sake of dira, which will transform this enclosure to a makam which is hukaf ladira. Let's discuss miyat first. So if he's going to try to do that by planting trees and lessening the total surface space of the karfif beside it, the Gemara says that's ineffective, because a karfif is meant to have trees. The trees are a fixed feature in a karfif and are batal to the karfif, and therefore cannot be deducted from the total space of the karfif. What if we created this tall post? So if it's 4 tefachim wide, it's a makam chashav. It constitutes a new usage area and is not included in total surface area of the karfif beside it. Therefore it deducts from its total size. If the amud is anywhere from 3 to 4 tefachim, we have achlekes. If it's less than 3, which is within the share of lavad, it's not reckoned with and is not memayit the share of the karfif. According to Simi's approach, if it's between 3 and 4, we'll agree it's okay. If it's less than 3, then we have the machlekes. We have plaster which was pasted onto the interior surface of the pre-existing wall in order to be memayit the total surface area of the karfif. If this plaster could stand by its own right, all agree it's effective. If it cannot stand by its own right, if it needs to be supported by the wall, we have a machlekes whether or not it's effective. Regarding creating a new mechitza along the interior surface of the mechitza surrounding the karfif, this new mechitza will be l'shem dira, for residential purposes. Do we say that now it's been transformed into a residential enclosure? So it depends. If the space between the new and old mechitza is 4 tefachim, that's considered to be a makam chashav, a proper mechitza, and therefore it's effective. If the space is between 3 and 4, we have machlekes. If it's less than 3, all agree it's ineffective. According to Simi's approach, if it's between 3 and 4, we have machlekes. All agree it's okay. If it's less than 3, that's when we have the machlekes. All agree if he makes a mechitza on top of this mound, on the edge of this tail, which is now properly enclosing the top portion of the tail, all agree this has now become a makam hukaf ladira, because the upper mechitzas, which are directly benefiting the members of the tail, was on the shem dira. Mechitza holds, generally speaking, even a mechitza on top of another mechitza works in order to be considered makam hukaf ladira. All agree when it comes to acquiring the nichse hager, placing a mechitza on top of another pre-existing mechitza is ineffective to be kind of the nechas. Continues the Gemara. Karfif beis shalish. What if we have this large karfif, 3 saw in size, too large, exceeds the limits of the beis sign? And what did he do? V'kira b'ei beis saw. He placed a roof above 1 saw, a third of this karfif. Shall we say that he has now separated that beis off from the rest, and now you have 2 parts of this karfif, unrelated to each other, each one within the limit, the permitted limit? This is beis saw, and the rest is only 2 saw, so you're okay? Or do we say it's considered to be still 1 large area which exceeds the limit of 2 saw? Rava, or some say Rabba, Amar Avir Kiruya Miyatri. The space, the Avir underneath its roof, Miyatri, gets added to the rest of the area, meaning we consider it to be 1 large enclosure. You cannot separate between 2 portions. Rav Zera Amar, Ein Avir Kiruya Miyatri. The space underneath the roof does not get added to the rest of the area, and therefore we have a roofed area which is merely a saw, small in size. We have the rest of the karfif, which is merely 2 saw, and therefore it's within the limit, and you can carry throughout it. He holds that underneath the roof is a separate area, and it cannot be added to the rest, and cannot result in a large size karfif. Says more lema, shall we say, Rabba Rav Zera. This machlekes, beplukta the Rav Shmuel kamifliki. They're actually having a similar machlekes, as we find between Rav and Shmuel, regarding a roofed area. The itma, as we learned, achsadra bebika. Achsadra is a freestanding sailing, a terrace standing, supported by poles, sitting out in a bika, in a valley. This achsadra has no mechitzas whatsoever. Rav Amar mutul talta bekula. One may carry underneath this achsadra due to the fact that there's a ceiling here. Shmuel Amar ema taltan el badal damis. One cannot carry under this roofed area because it's a carmeless. It has no mechitzas around it. Explains the Gemara. Rav Amar mutul talta bekula. One can carry throughout this achsadra. Amrinon pi tikru yoyd v'soisim. We apply the concept of pi tikra, the mouth, the edge of that ceiling, meaning when you're facing a ceiling, so the ceiling has a front surface, which is a vertical surface. When you're facing it, it appears like you're entering a new area. That front surface, the edge of that front surface, appears like it's heading downward. descending. Yord v'soisim. Taisus later explains it's like a Pesach. It makes that formation of an entranceway. It's not from Lachamash Sinai. And that creates an enclosure to the area underneath it. So Rav says we apply that concept here as well, even though we're merely speaking about a freestanding roof without any mechitzos. That roof is considered to be Yord v'soisim. It creates that enclosure, and the space underneath it is Rosh Hashanah. Amrinan pitiku Yord v'soisim. Shmuel Amar, he says no. You cannot carry underneath this achsadra, regarded as a karmelis. You can only carry within 4 amas. Why? We don't apply the concept of pitikr, the edge of the ceiling comes down and blocks off, because it's an unenclosed area. It's not a roof on top of mechitzas. You need to at least have at least one mechitzah. So the roof is roofing in an enclosed area, but no mechitzah, a freestanding roof. It doesn't come down and close off the area. So apparently, it says the Gemara, Rava, who told us that when we cover up a part of the karfif with a freestanding roof, underneath that karfif is considered to be a separate domain from the rest, and therefore is deducted from the total area space of this karfif. He holds, like Rav, that even in this case of a freestanding ceiling, we apply the concept of pitikr yod v'soisim. Whereas Reb Zera disagrees. He holds like Shmuel. We will not consider this roof as though it's coming down. Therefore, the space underneath that roofed area connects itself with the rest of the karfif for a total of 3 sa, which exceeds the limit. Says the Gemara, not necessarily so. If this roof on top of the karfif was a properly constructed roof, was a flat roof, in which case we have that front surface of that roof facing you, and the lower and the edge of that surface appears to be heading downwards, even Rabbah, would agree to Rav's shita that we apply pitikr yod v'soisim even in an unenclosed area which is covered by a roof. Hachanami, certainly Rabbah would hold like Rav that we consider to be an enclosed area. Hachamai skinan, you know what we're speaking about over here? Our machlekes is between Rav and Rav Zera by the karfif. We're not speaking about a flat roof. The avda ki arzila, it was fashioned like a arzila is an addition to a home. So you have a flat roof, and then you have that addition with the roof going diagonally downward. So the bottom surface, the front surface of that roof is not vertical. It's facing downward. So you can't apply the concept of pitikr yod v'soisim. It doesn't have that same effect like a flat surface facing you, which appears to be heading downward. And therefore, Rava maintains, in this case, you can't apply the concept. Generally, I agree to Rav. We apply that concept to a roofed area. This case is different. And therefore, we cannot separate the roof portion, from the rest of the karfif. And therefore, we have a total of 3 sa, and you're also to be metal. Apparently, Rav Zera disagrees. He says, if it's underneath a roofed area, even with a slanty roof, it's considered to be a separate area from the rest, leaving you with 2 parts to this karfif. One is merely a size of sa, and one 2 sa, and they're both mutter b'tilta. Rav Zera, Umadina, I agree, I will admit, in the following case, that it's us. Bekarfif, shenifratz b'maloi l'chatz. We have a karfif which is merely 2 sa in size, but it was nifratz b'maloi l'chatz. It was breached entirely, meaning one of its walls was completely demolished, and now it's been exposed to a chatz, a courtyard. She'asar, in this case, I agree, it's us. My time, why? Hoyel va'avir chatzer me'yatroi. Because the airspace of the courtyard will be added to the karfif, which will now total a surface area of greater than 2 sa, and it's awesome. So although I disagree when it comes to a roofed area, I say, well, it's a separate area and it cannot be added to the total. But in this case, this karfif has now exceeded its limit because it's been exposed to a chatzar. And that surface gets added to the karfif, creating a large size karfif greater than 2 sa. Maskef Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef challenged this statement. Well, how can you say the karfif now is also? The chatzar is a makom hukaf l'dira. It's enclosed for residential purposes. It cannot be added to the total area of loy hukaf l'dira. Why would you say that? It's a residential enclosure. Now, perhaps there's another concern, because we have 2 areas adjacent to each other, which are breached to each other. Perhaps, since they're 2 separate usage areas, where you cannot really transfer from one to the other, which is the Shitas Chacham, they hold even 2 outdoor areas, like a Chatzar, a Karfif, a Gina, a roof. Outdoor usage areas are considered to be separately designated areas, and one cannot transfer a cleave from one to the other. It's like taking from one shis to the other. It resembles Sarabim. That's Shittas Chacham. What Shittas Reb Shimon is that anything outdoors doesn't have sufficient use, sufficient designation for personal use. It's not like a person's dwelling, like his home. It's like an indoor area. An outdoor area is not so chashav, doesn't have prominent usage that we should be concerned regarding transferring from one type of area to the other. He holds all these different varieties of outdoor usage areas, a courtyard, a karfif, a gin, a gag. It's all considered to be one happy family. One can transfer freely from one to the other. So Rabbi Yosef challenged the statement of Zera. He says, what's wrong with a karfif being exposed to a chatzar? Since according to Rabbi Shimon, you can transfer one to the other, they don't interfere with each other. So even if it's been totally breached to the chatzar, there'd be no reason to disallow carrying the karfif. So number one, the karfif is a makam hukav l'dir. It's a residential area. And will not increase the size of this karfif. Shlo yukav l'dir. The chatzar doesn't relate to that. The chatzar is a residential area. The karfif itself is merely 2 sons size. So although the karfif was not hukav l'dir, but it's merely 2 sons within the limits. So what's the problem? Is it because it's been exposed to a different type of usage area? Is the space of the chatzar which is mutaloi, from which you can transfer from the karfif. You can transfer back and forth according to Reb Shimon. Oisrei will be oiser the karfif. Why should it do so? What's the problem? So he challenged Rav Zera's halach. Amalei Abaye, come on, Reb Shimon. Are you working with Reb Shimon's concept that 2 outdoor areas are designated as one and the same, which allows transfer from one to the other? Therefore, there's no concern with this karfif, which is b'tzvah chacha. Is that what you're basing your challenge on? Says Abaye, even according to Reb Shimon, there's a concern here. The Reb Shimon Nami, ha'ika aver makam mechitzis. What about the space of the mechitzis themselves? The karfif was formerly properly enclosed, now lost its mechitzah, was nifratz l'chatzah. The chatzah itself doesn't pose any concern here. Doesn't interfere with the karfif whatsoever. The problem is that the size of the karfif has now been increased due to the fact that those mechitzas which were formerly in existence now disappeared. So the space of the mechitza itself now gets annexed to the karfif, resulting in a larger karfif, larger than 2 son. It's a makam lokav l'dira, larger than 2 son. Therefore, it's awesome. That's the pshat of Zera, says Abaye. Ha'ika aver makam mechitzas. We have the space of the mechitzas, which gets added to the total area of the karfif. How do we know that the space of a mechitza, a place which hosted a mechitza, will be considered like part of the interior space of the karfif and will be added to the total? How do we know that concept is true? Says Abaye, I'll bring you a right. The Rav Chizda taught us this concept. Karfif shenifratz b'maloi l'chatzar. So a similar case, we have a karfif which has been totally breached on one side to a chatzar. Says Rav Chizda, chatzar muteras, the karfif aser. You can continue carrying the chatzar, but the karfif, due to the fact that it's been totally breached to the chatzar, you can no longer carry in that karfif. Let's analyze Rav Chizda's halach. Whose shita is he basing it on? Is he following the Rabbanan? Let's work with that. He holds that 2 outdoor areas are considered to be 2 separately designated areas where you cannot transfer one to the other. So that explains why the karfif can no longer carry, because he's exposed to a chatzar, which is a different type of area, and therefore the 2 areas interfere with each other and can no longer carry in the karfif. However, in the chatzar, there's no concern, because let's remember the chatzar is wider than the karfif. Therefore, although the karfif has been totally exposed to the chatzar, lost its wall, but the chatzar still has some remnants of its wall, 2 overlapping portions on both sides of that karfif, on either side of that pirza. Therefore, for the chatzar's sake, there's no pirza, it's merely a pesach. So the chatzar is considered to be adequately separated from the karfif, and therefore the chatzar can carry. Is that the pshat of Chizda? That's why the karfif can carry and the chatzar can? Chatzar, my timer. Why does Rav Chizda tell us the chatzar is allowed to carry and the karfif not? Why is the chatzar different? The isla gilfufe, because it has those overlaps on either side of the pirza, and that creates a pesach and separates the chatzar from the karfif. Is that the reason? Whereas the karfif doesn't have overlaps because it's a narrow karfif. Its wall has been completely breached. It's been completely exposed to the chatzar next to it. Is that an absolute fact? It's merely circumstantial. Sometimes you can have just the opposite. Sometimes in Mishkachas Le'ifcha, you find just the opposite. For instance, the karfif is wider than the chatzar, in which case it's the chatzar who lost this entire wall. But the karfif has overlaps. So in this case, the karfif should be mutter and the chatzar should be asa. So why is Rav Chisda stated as an unequivocal fact, an absolute halacha, that the chatzar is mutter, the karfif is asa? Depends on the circumstance. So apparently that's not the pshat of Rav Chisda. Apparently Rav Chisda is following Rav Shimon Shita. The fact that we have a karfif next to a chatzar, both outdoor areas, they don't interfere with each other. Ella, rather mishum, why is the karfif asr? For an entirely different concern. Because the karfif has now been enlarged due to the fact that the mechitza fell apart. The space of that former mechitza gets added to the total area of the karfif, resulting in a large area of karfif greater than 2 sa, and therefore it's asr. Ella mishum da'amrina, this meaning the karfif, which cannot be larger than 2 sa because it's not hukaf l'dira. Zeh avir mechitzas miyatre, the space of the pre-existing walls that collapsed, gets added to the space of the karfif, resulting in a large karfif. Therefore it's also. Regarding the chatzar, v'zeh ein avir mechitzas miyatre, the space of the mechitzas do not get added, don't create a concern regarding the size of the chatzar, because the chatzar is a residential area, it can be any size you want. So that's the pshat of Chisda. And this supports Rav Zera's halacha, who told us that the space of the former mechitza gets added to the space of the karfif, resulting in a larger karfif, larger than allowed. Continues the Gemara, who busted up? There was this orchard, which was behind the home. So it had 3 mechitzas, and the 4th mechitza was actually the back wall of the home, which was open to the backyard, which creates a heck of ladira, residential enclosure. How busted, there was this orchard, that was samach, leguda da padna, which was adjacent to the wall of this apadnas mansion. So the back wall of the mansion was actually the mechitza, the 4th mechitza of this orchard. So what happened? Nafal ashita, b'riyaisa dapadna, the outer wall, ashita b'riyaisa, the outer wall, meaning this back wall, which was adjacent to the orchard, it collapsed. Now, we don't have that wall, but we have the other walls. The remaining walls of that mansion are still standing in existence. And right now they are going to be the 4th side of this enclosure. Sabra Abivi Lemeimer, Abivi figured to say, Lismech, let's rely, Aguda Gviyasa, on those interior walls. Amalei Papi, he didn't like this. Mishum Da'asu Mimuloi, because you come from the family which is cut off. Rabbi was the son of Abaye, you came from the family of Beis Eli, which were given a punishment to live short lives. So you came from a cut-off family. Because of that, Amrisu Milu Milyasa, you go and you relate cut-off things, improper statements, improper halachas. It's incorrect. You can't rely on those mechitzas. Why? Hanach mechitzas, those other walls, L'gavoy Avidan, they were formed and constructed for the interior of the home, not to serve as a mechitzah for the backyard, for the orchard. L'veroy Avidan, they weren't created for the outside, for the backyard, and therefore they cannot be applied to the bustan of this backyard to make it a mukha l'dira. So if the wall, which is actually bordering the bustana, collapsed, this bustan now no longer has a hekef l'dira, and therefore you cannot carry throughout this bustana. Okay, time for a brief chazorah of today's daf. We began with a karfif, which was larger than 2 sa, which was not hukaf l'dira. We can apply 2 methods, either lessen the size of that karfif, or to actually create a new mechitza, which will make it a mukha l'dira. Gemara tells us trees don't do anything to the size. A post, if it's large in size, significant, will actually affect change, because it will lessen the total area space of that karfif. If it's 4 tfachim in size, it works. Between 3 and 4, we have machlokes. Less than 3, it's ineffective. According to Rav Simi, between 3 and 4, it works. Less than 3, we have machlokes. We plastered tit onto the interior surface of that wall. If it's freestanding tit, it can stand on its own, it works. If it cannot stand on its own, it needs to be supported by that wall, we have machlokes. We create a new mechitza within this enclosure, l'shem dira. If we distance it 4 tfachim from the pre-existing wall, all agrees that it works. Between 3 and 4, we have machlokes. Less than 3, all agree that mechitza is ineffective. According to Rav Simi, between 3 and 4 it certainly works. Less than 3 we have machlokes. All agree if he places a mechitza at the edge of a tel, so he surrounds the upper surface of a mound with a mechitza, all agree. He has now made that tel into a mukha l'dira, and you can carry throughout that tel despite its large size. Because it maintains, even generally speaking, a mechitza on top of a mechitza works for Shabbos, works to make it a mukha l'dira. When it comes to be koine, the nichsi ager, you get a proper kinyan, an effective kinyan which actually benefits the land, and therefore mechitza on top of mechitza is totally ineffective. Now what if he built a mechitza l'shein dira on top of a pre-existing mechitza, and that former mechitza sinks into the ground, leaving the upper mechitzas intact? When it comes to Shabbos, it's effective. But he can't be koine the nechasim of a ger in this manner, because at the time of the construction, it wasn't benefiting the land below. The Gemara spoke about a large-sized karfif, which was partially roofed. The Gemara concluded, Rav and Rav Zera both agree that if it's a flat roof, the roofed area is considered to be a separate entity from the rest of the karfif, and not reckoned within the total area space of the karfif. But if it's a slanty roof, according to Rava, it's ineffective. According to Rav Zera, even in this case, the roofed area is considered to be a separate portion. Even Rav Zera would agree that if a wall falls apart, it collapses, that space of that former mechitza gets added to the interior surface of the karfif, resulting in a large-sized karfif. And if it's greater than 2 sa, you cannot carry within it. The Gemara concludes that the wall adjacent to the bustana will only be effective if it was formed and constructed for the sake of enclosing that orchard. But you cannot use the rest of the mechitza of the home, which were constructed for the interior use of that home.